what? I don't think I have it. I had two announcements. One was the applications for food trucks are, we are now accepting applications for the next year of food truck licenses beginning tomorrow, and I think the deadline is March 1st. Food truck licenses will be allocated and the licenses are issued through the Health Department and the Communities and Development Department, and they will only be permitted in locations where the Board of Selectmen has approved the locations. We, the board, have worked very hard with our departments to identify locations that don't create an undue burden on our existing food establishments. But the applications are to go to the Brookline Health Department, I believe. Is that right? Yes, okay. Go to the Brookline Health Department, and we will be accepting applications through March 1st. So, and then just one observation, we all at this table attended a memorial service for former Selectman Estelle Cates this morning, which was very moving. And I have to say, I think we've lost an icon for the town, but also she had many attributes, not the least of which a great sense of humor and a fabulous voice, and we're going to miss her.
Can I just add something to that? I'm smiling as I think about this funeral, which usually you don't, but Estelle had planned this out, and she managed to be the star of her funeral. She had, in between some lovely comments from family and close friends, she had them play selections from her CD of her singing various songs. So it was, you know, a very, very Estelle.
It was an Estelle funeral.
And
absolutely.
We are really going to miss her, but I love it that she managed to sort of be present at the event.
I remembered the other thing I need to say, and I'll let Selectman Daley think about what that note says. Next Monday is President's Day, and following that school vacation week, there will be no Selectmen's meeting next Tuesday. Selectman Daley.
Yes, last night there was a very well-attended meeting in North Brookline with many people who live in that area, and our police department, and also the police chief for Boston University, and some of his staff were there, and several members of our police staff were there with the chief. And first we were talking about, the chief was kind of explaining what they had done and where the recent incidents had been, the crimes in North Brookline. There had been some burglaries, and one was a stabbing and burglary. And people had been very concerned about that. But I think, you know, the response by our police department was very swift and comprehensive. They worked with BU and seemed to have taken care of the problems, you know, as expeditiously as possible. And I think people were very reassured as they heard all that had happened. We then also were talking, though, about party noise in the area, because there's a number of BU students that live off campus, live in Brookline, and particularly at the Dexter Park apartment complex. And there is still quite a bit of concern, and people are looking for, you know, answers through zoning or legal remedies or whatever we can do to try to address some of those continuing noise issues. They actually, I think a lot of their ire was directed at BU, feeling that BU should be doing more because many of these are their students.
Well, obviously something we will have to stay on top of and continue to monitor. Other comments? No? Okay, then I will move us to the miscellaneous calendar. First item is the minutes from February 5th. I have some corrections, which I will pass in. Any other amendments to the minutes?
I do have a couple as well.
Okay.
Passing those to Kate.
Give those to Kate. Then I move that we approve the minutes as amended for February 5th, 2013. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. I will point out that we are 3 tonight because Selectman Benka is out of town.
Can I add one other announcement?
Sure, please.
I want to just tell people that the budget book is available, must-read material for those of us who, like
For the
be
fiscal
in the
wonks, definitely, right.
and I think they're no longer being sent to town meeting members. I think town meeting members get a notice, and if they want the book, they need to come here and get it. Is that the status?
I believe so. It's posted online as well.
Okay, so people should, if they're interested, it's very comprehensive. They do a great job giving a lot of information, breaking the budgets down by department, and also looking at the overview of how we spend how we get our dollars and how we spend them. So it's interesting material.
I'm going to ask Sean and Melissa to autograph my copy.
Yes, yes, we should
Right,
say that Sean Cronin and Melissa Goff, who put this together under Mr. Kleckner's
Able supervision.
supervision, regularly win awards for the
That's
budget
true,
book.
that's true. We are very, very grateful. In addition, it's a very well-thought-through budget. So, let's move on to the calendar, and the first item is a committee of 7.
Yes, I
and
think it's
Commissioner
my
Bennett.
turn, so I'll.
Okay. We are prepared to designate Selectman Daley as chair of the committee. Do you want to explain what this project involves?
Yeah, this committee of 7 will be part of the elevator upgrades at the Lynch Recreation Center and the Lawrence School. The upgrades are hydraulics, some of the cabs, just rehabbing elevators that have not had any work done on them with recent renovation projects.
Okay, any questions for the commissioner?
No, but I like those glass elevators where you can see outside, so I'll certainly be pushing for that at Committee 7.
Okay, all right, I move that we designate Selectman Daley to chair the committee of 7 for the elevator upgrades at Lynch Recreation Center and the Amos Lawrence School. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley.
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We're going to get through this very quickly. Voting takes no time at all. Planning and Community Development proposal to solarize. To solarize? We have a new verb here.
Good evening, Kara Bruton, Acting Director for the Planning Department. I'm here on behalf of Laura Curtis, who's our Senior Planner and works on many of our grants related to environmental climate action change grants. And with me tonight is Keisuke Toyofuku, who you probably remember just voting him into
Recently, yes.
one of our new members of the Selectmen's Committee for Climate Action. This is a grant application that we're looking for authorization for you all to sign, that if we were a community that were selected, it's basically a $2,500 grant and technical assistance is what it boils down to. The state agencies would, if selected, would come to Brookline and talk to us about what kind of marketing plan we would have to get residents in Brookline to group together and think about working with a solar installation, solar panel installer, but doing it as a group drives down the cost. And so this RFP is through the state for a couple of reasons. One reason, again, the state agencies help the town with an RFP that kind of groups everybody together. This is their 3rd year doing it. This is the 2nd time we've applied, but we feel like we have a good chance this year of having the state accept us for the grant. Part of the application for the grant includes listing partners that will help marketing the program. And Laura Curtis and the Climate Action Group has been very successful with the Green Homes Brookline program. We're one of the, I think we're the top town in the Green Homes Brookline program as far as participation. And so we have the track record now to show that this outreach works. We know how to do it. And on that note, you have in front of you attachment A, which is the authorized application form. And I'm just going to hand out, we have an updated page A1, which has a longer list of partners that would partner with us in the Solarize Mass program.
And I assume that as a green community, we get at least some additional recognition as a green community for participating?
I think, again, it goes to our track record of spending, of accepting the grant dollars, keeping up our certification, and they are very much related.
Okay. Any questions from members of the board? Yes, Selectman Daley?
Yes, I have a question, and maybe Mr. Toyofuku could answer it. I'd be interested in solar roofs, but what are you're going to be the coach, I guess. So if I have trees in my yard, so does that kind of shade the house somewhat? So does that mean I'm not a good solar roof?
Potentially. I mean, it certainly depends. And so part of the program, really, and I would be one of the solar coaches, is to pull together not only town volunteers and partners to help promote just more solar, more PV within our community. And then we'd partner with an installer who would actually go through and help you do those types of assessments to determine, okay, is your roof south-facing? Are there trees that potentially could be shade issues? And they'd also explain financing, how the process would work, in terms of net metering and all of those more technical bits. And certainly the other solar coach, Werner, and I would be there to also help answer questions for the community. I mean, it's a pretty aggressive plan. I mean, the comment that we got back was, gosh, government takes so long to do things, but they're not giving us any time to put together this application. Because I think it was released January 16th, and it's basically due February 20th, so
Wow.
it's very, very, very quick. And it's forcing us, which is actually a good thing, it's forcing us to really get organized, focus, spend some time, work through the application, think it through, what would our marketing strategy be, and it's really, I think it's probably a good thing for the program itself.
I am aware that there is one model out there where people can lease, in effect, the acres of their roof to another entity who can install the solar panels, and then I assume somehow there's a way that gets accounted for, which is a mystery, but is that one of the options
that would be included, correct. And so we're proposing to put into the application, well, you don't think it's too lofty, but a goal of about 1 megawatt. And that would be total cumulative installation base for the program. So that would be residential and commercial.
But I thought when you put solar stuff on your roof that typically people got their hot water that way. Is that?
That is another use of it. This would be, from a net metering perspective, would basically mean your meter could run both directions, your electrical meter. So you could feed power back into the grid, or you would consume power, depending on if you're producing electricity or not.
Selectman Goldstein?
Carol will remember that a couple of years ago, as we prepared for the Green Communities Act, we talked about Single Tree Hill and the potential to put a small solar farm up there. Is that some program that might be under the purview of this program?
That sounds more commercial. I don't believe so. This would be more, commercial in terms of restaurants or businesses within Brookline, the town itself, that have a roof that might be of interest. But in terms of a larger project, I think it would depend on the size, and I don't know the size of that proposed project. But currently, through the GCA, the Green Communities Act, and the DOER, and the whole net metering ruling, it's basically you're limited to about, I believe, 10 megawatts per installation, which, I mean, that is sizable. I mean, we're talking already a few acres at that point. And that's something that I think as the Climate Action Committee, we're certainly considering, but just given the urgency of getting this application in, this is really the focus, is how can we help promote more PV within the community. And just, even being a homeowner myself, it's something that I've found difficult trying to find the right solar installer. And so it certainly would be nice to have a program that has the structure and clearly the history and the track record that this has had through the Mass CEC, to help kind of shepherd that process along, and have others in the community, join together and help explain and, pass information around to others.
In that case, off the track slightly, are you aware of the Single Tree Hill site, and has anyone ever taken you up there?
No, I haven't personally seen it myself, but I can certainly.
You ought to take a look, because already you've brought this fresh idea. I think that's one to look at, too.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Although it's not a very big,
It's not very big.
Yeah, my understanding was we had to designate some site to get the Green Communities thing, and that neighbors weren't necessarily happy about the idea of that being a big solar installation.
Don't recall any vocal opposition to it, but that's certainly something that would have to be vetted.
Well, we do think, I think all of us agree that to the extent that we can aggregate people together and share purchasing, and also educate the community. And I would say I particularly appreciate, and I think this goes back to the energy assessments that are being done, partly it's really important to help educate people about what can be done, what's appropriate, and what has the right cost-benefit payoff, because you could be very enthusiastic about solar panels and then discover not even that you have trees, but that you just face the wrong direction, and there's no way it would ever be reasonable as a financial investment. And I think having someone to come and consult about that was really, really helpful. So, okay.
I have one final
Sure.
question. I have wondered if having those dark panels on your roof might have the negative side effect of making your house hotter in the summer?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, generally, there's a buffer, so the panel itself, which is then fixed to the roof, and then there's usually a somewhat of a gap of air that would be somewhat of an insulator. I'm personally not aware of anything, and I think from if you've gone through the assessment, the energy efficiency assessment, hopefully you have insulation in your attic and all those sorts of things as well. But we haven't, in the industry that I haven't heard of that as an issue.
Okay, I move that we authorize the Department of Planning and Community Development to submit a proposal for the Solarize Massachusetts program. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Go for it. Get your deadline. Next item has to do with energy. It's rebates from National Grid. Mr. Bennett. I assume we're doing something right here.
Yeah, good evening again. Yes, this is part of the program. The Public Buildings Division is working out with the utility companies. So this is, we're requesting that you accept $19,500 in rebates for work done for efficient boilers at various locations in town. This will bring the total up to approximately $70,000 we've received this year in rebates.
That's
from,
impressive.
the
Selectman
utilities.
Daley?
Well, I've said this to Mr. Simmons, and I think I should tell his boss that I think he's been doing a great job, you know, doing as many energy-efficient projects within our existing buildings as possible, and our new renovations as well. So we appreciate the effort.
I'll get that message to him. We're also expecting about $88,000 in rebates from the Runkle School when those get
wow.
approved.
Okay, well, that's clearly a way of measuring success.
Yes.
Any other questions? No? I move that we accept rebates totaling $19,500 from National Grid to help for helping offset the cost of energy-efficient condensing gas-fired boilers. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is an item for the town clerk, who I do not see, but I'm not sure we need him for this. This would authorize filling vacancies in town meeting at the municipal election on April 30th. So I will move that we authorize the town clerk to place the following vacancies on the ballot for April 30th, 2013 annual town election. For one town meeting member for 1-year term in precincts 2 and 7. For one town meeting member, a 2-year term in precinct 9. For 2 town meeting members for 2-year terms in precinct 10. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman, Goldstein?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. You could be banker just for one night. Is that right? And then finally, we have a chance to talk about storming Nemo. Commissioner Papasturgeon, if you would come forward, only because we have your person present. Yeah, sure.
Are you going to do this first?
Yeah, shall we do the business first and then give you a chance to tell us what we have and have not done with regard to snow? But let's do the particular Chapter 90 request, if you'd like to explain, please.
Thank you. Andy Papasturgeon, Commissioner of Public Works.
And he's lost his voice.
I've lost my voice, I've lost my mind, I've lost it all. Yes, but we're doing the best we can. This is a Chapter 90 project request for the reconstruction of Rangeley Road and Princeton Road, and total in the amount of $569,000. The streets were deemed eligible for Chapter 90 funding, which we didn't think they would be initially. So rather than take the money out of the street rehabilitation accounts, we'd be able to pull it under the Chapter 90 funding. This will allow for the complete cold planing and overlaying of pavement on both roads in their entirety, removing and replacing existing sidewalks, wheelchair ramps, and driveway aprons with either hot mix asphalt or concrete as we normally would do. So this is the paperwork to initiate the project request with Mass DOT. It includes the environmental punch list that's required to be filled out for each project request, where you go through and make sure that all your permitting is in order. And we would request your approval on this so that we could move forward.
And this is actually work that continues what you were doing last year, too, right? I mean, in the same neighborhood.
Last year, we did Beverly Road.
Right.
This will complete the area, Princeton Road and Rangeley Road are particularly in need of some rehabilitation, so that'll occur this spring. Actually, we're getting ready to put the project out to bid very soon.
Okay. Questions for Commissioner Papasturgeon?
No, these streets are badly in need, I agree.
Okay. I think we will happily approve this. Fine. All right, so we'll vote this, and then we're going to skip to an additional item on the calendar, which is actually on the main calendar while you're here, so that you can talk to us about snow. But I'm first going to move, sorry about the confusion here, I've got two different calendars with two different lists. I move that we approve and execute a Chapter 90 request in the amount of $569,000 and an environmental punch list to the Mass Department of Transportation in reconstruction of Rangeley Road and Princeton Road. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So while you are there, let us also take up the snow deficit, Chapter 44, and whatever else you would like to tell us about the last 3 or 4 days. And there's some things you don't have to tell us.
There's a lot of things I won't tell you.
Yeah, okay, all right.
But there are a few things I'd like to tell you. I'll just give you a real overview of the storm. This was a particularly intense storm for us, not completely unexpected, although the intensity of the storm and then overnight hours between Friday night and Saturday morning was something that I don't think I've ever seen. It was almost a combination of a snowstorm and a hurricane at once. We were getting snowfall rates of up to 3 inches per hour for a stretch of time there, and the snow was blowing sideways.
And I understand that becomes the definition of a blizzard, which I never knew before.
It is,
I just thought a
yeah.
blizzard was a lot of snow.
Well, this was certainly a blizzard, and it lived up to its reputation. It's particularly hazardous for our drivers because, under whiteout conditions, it's extremely difficult to see what you're doing. And we spent a lot of time this storm on those overnight hours actually sending loaders out to free up some of our smaller plows that were stuck and couldn't proceed. So we would have to dispatch front-end loaders to actually pull them out of snowbanks because the visibility was so poor. And the snowfall was so intense. This was a very difficult storm for us to fight. It was basically a 24-hour storm duration, the storm itself. Just prior to this particular storm, people probably don't realize, but we've had 12 other snow and ice events, we call it, this particular winter season. We have had 18 inches of snow prior to this weekend's blizzard. The official total for this one was 26 inches of snow in Brookline. That brings our yearly total so far to 44 inches, which coincidentally is about the amount of snow that we budget for.
Aha,
Normal amounts.
but not in this,
Not in this intensity, by no means. We had at the height of the storm 127 DPW employees out on the road. In addition to that, we had about 40 private contractors also supplementing our forces, including standby forestry services, because we were anticipating tree loss, limb loss, and power outages at the height of the storm. Luckily, that did not materialize. We only had a couple of trees that came down from the wind and the heavy snow. At the height of the storm, the most we ever had out of service for NSTAR was 15 residents, which were cleared up generally within 2 to 3 hours, maybe a little bit more in some cases, but certainly not the totals that we were expecting. We had 85 pieces of snow fighting equipment on the road in all different shapes and sizes. In addition to that, we had brought in 18 contractor pieces of equipment, which are generally heavy trucks, plows, and large front-end loaders. The EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, was activated on Friday at noontime and stayed active until Saturday at 7:30 p.m. And for those of you who have never seen our Emergency Operations Center, it's really something to see when it's in operation, and it works really well. And I'm glad that Captain Gropman has joined me here tonight, because he played an integral part of making sure that that operations center worked efficiently. That serves as a hub for all DPW operations during the storm. It serves as a dispatch center for police and emergency vehicles, and also serves as the hub for our towing operations to enforce the parking ban. Everything is coordinated out of one location, and it really makes a big difference having everybody in the same room. In addition to that, we're live online with NSTAR throughout the entire storm through that facility, so we can see in real time through their portal just what our power loss conditions are, and we are in live contact with MEMA headquarters in Framingham as well through there. So it's really a bonus to have that center activated for these types of storms. We towed 21 vehicles during the storm, which is a very low number compared to what we normally would tow on an event. I think the statewide driving ban that the governor imposed was certainly helpful. People were paying attention to that. The parking ban that we imposed in Brookline, folks were also paying, for the most part, attention to that. And like I said, there were about 21 vehicles that we did end up towing until the relaxation of the parking ban late Sunday and early Monday morning. This particular storm was very difficult for us because of the duration. It was a 24-hour storm event, which is long in itself, but post-storm cleanups on this particular storm, we have different phases of cleanup on a snowstorm. We have the initial post-storm cleanup, which normally doesn't take more than 6 to 12 hours. This storm took 30 hours to do, and that's not the extended cleanup that we're, of course, still doing as we speak. When you have long periods like that and you have men working around the clock, you have to make arrangements to give them downtime as a matter of safety. You can't have guys that are out on heavy pieces of equipment for long, long periods of time under these conditions without generating some accidents. So we were forced to actually do a personnel rotation on this storm and actually bring in whole groups of employees for downtime. We did not want to release them because it would be difficult for them to get home, and we were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get back. So we provided areas at the Municipal Service Center where they could sleep and get something to eat and re-energize themselves, and I think it worked out very well. As you probably all know, I used our City Watch notification system on 2 occasions for this storm. One to announce the actual parking ban going into effect, and we did something a little bit different this time. Normally, some of our major complaints are that, the storm ends and folks come out of their homes and the first thing they do is shovel themselves out and clear their driveways. And then, a couple hours later, along comes the town's plows again and pushes back everything to the curb and plows them in. So we thought that we'd be a little bit proactive and try to at least warn people and let them know the period of time that we would be doing snowbank pushback. And we put that announcement out in addition to reminding them that the parking ban was still in effect. And I think it was pretty helpful. This storm here is different because it didn't allow us to push back to the curb. The volume of snow was so great that it just was not possible to push every street back curb to curb, although we did the best that we could. School closings, the superintendent decided to close school on Friday as a matter of safety for getting children and teachers and personnel back home before the storm intensified, which was a good move. We were forced to close school again on Monday, although the schools were cleaned and prepared on Sunday and Sunday night. It was my determination on Sunday night that although the schools were ready to open, the areas surrounding the schools were not, meaning the sidewalks, a lot of the teacher parking areas where in some cases such as Runkle School is on-street parking, and we were nowhere ready to clear that out on Sunday. So I advised the superintendent that in my opinion it would be best to hold school off one more day. And I still believe today that that was the right decision to do.
I think he was concerned about teachers being able to travel too, so
Yeah.
there were other concerns as well.
There are still a few areas that we are working on as we speak with our own town forces, trying to run, we call running the curb with front-end loaders because the banks are so large, the streets are so narrow. We try to run the curb with the loaders in areas that are needed so that we can at least get parking tight up against the curb and not restricting the flow of traffic. So we continue to do that. I will admit that there was a slight miscommunication at the Runkle School this year because of the change in the parking areas for teachers. There was a little miscommunication between transportation and highway, and while highway went out and cleared some of the areas, they didn't clear all the areas in time for school to open on Tuesday morning. So we pretty much jumped in and took care of those as we saw later on in the day. I will also tell you that beginning tonight at 10 o'clock, we have launched a full snow removal operation that's going to run for 2 nights consecutively. It'll run from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. And it's going to look like an army invading town tonight if anybody's out there watching. But we've got about 40 trucks staged, ready to go. 10 front-end loaders, very large front-end loaders. We have a couple of bulldozers standing by up at our transfer station to begin the construction of Mount Nemo, that we're going to call it this year. If you recall, maybe 2 years ago, we had a very large mountain of snow up there. But we are going to remove snow in the Coolidge Corner area, just for the sake of folks who need to know. That includes Beacon Street from Marion to Pleasant on both sides. Harvard Street, its entire length from Brookline Village to the town line, both sides, the snow will be removed. Washington Square, we will be removing snow on Beacon Street, both sides from Westbourne Terrace to Tappan Street, and on Washington Street from the fire station to Salisbury Road up to the Driscoll School. Brookline Village will be removing snow on Washington Street from Station Street to Cypress in its entirety, both sides. And on Lower Beacon Street, we'll be removing snow on the outbound side from St. Mary's Street to Hawes Street. It's an ambitious schedule to get done in 2 nights. We're hoping that we can do it. We're certain we can do it. It's not an inexpensive operation, but one that we feel is extremely necessary because of the amount of snow. So that leads me to the budget, which is the
If
next
you
item.
wouldn't mind pausing just for a moment,
Sure.
I'll let you catch your breath and your voice. The town administrator had some observations he wanted to make, and then I also want you to know that you got at least one very enthusiastic compliment on the work, and I would like to tell you about that too. So,
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was just going to introduce, actually, the Director and also Commissioner and Captain Grotman, but just wanted to say that this was a historic storm, and it didn't follow the usual protocol just because of the volume of the snow, and Brookline being such an urban area with a number of sidewalks, crosswalks, and other areas, it was just an unbelievable task, and I want to congratulate the Commissioner and his men and women of his department who did a fantastic job. And I also want to mention the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, which the Police Department has become very involved and successfully implemented the Chief's leadership with Captain Grotman and Mike Raskin and Casey Hatchett in particular that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are others and other departments that participate as well. But as the Commissioner mentioned, it's a really fantastic opportunity to coordinate and consolidate operations, and it's very effective. I haven't quite seen it as effective as this, and I just wanted to mention that. The other thing I would mention, and I placed at your table this evening, is Kevin Stokes, our Information Technology Director, noticed some statistics about the use of the internet and social media in this particular storm, and we've been using not only the website, but also Twitter and Facebook extensively. I know the police have as well, but we've been using it for this particular storm in addition to the so-called reverse 911 system. I thought was really effective this year. So with those, I would just turn it back to the Commissioner for the budgetary, and also if you'd allow Captain Grotman just to acknowledge some of the efforts of the police department.
I actually wanted to, I know not everybody was happy about every aspect, but we did get one very enthusiastic compliment, and part of what the person said, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she says, I want to send a huge thank you to the town of Brookline and the Department of Public Works for all their hard work during the blizzard of 2013. As a lifelong resident since 1971, a parent of school-aged children, and an employee of an employer in the area, I feel that I'm qualified to recognize the town and DPW's accomplishments over the weekend. And I'm going to skip part of it, but I'm also going to mention that she says, although data is not readily accessible, I would suspect that your DPW was staffed very differently in 1978, and that if comparisons were to be made, the current town leadership delivered hugely with significantly less resources. And I think that's kind of important. I was here in the blizzard of 78, and I remember we didn't go anywhere for many days. I do believe in that case the snow came on top of a prior snowfall, and what's really impressive was that this time not just the municipal response was excellent, but the state was on the same wavelength, and it seemed to me that I don't want to disparage our neighbors, but it seems to me we did a better job than some of our neighbors just a little bit sort of southeast of here, whose names I will not mention, but who did not clear their streets, and where people were stuck in cars apparently for hours, sometimes overnight. So I just think we've learned a lot about how to do this, and I personally am very grateful. Selectman Daley?
Yes, well, I want to add to the compliments. I understand you, Commissioner, were on the job from Friday through Sunday night, and I appreciate that you're here with us tonight because you must still be a little bit tired. But I think it was a tremendous snowfall, and I know, some people, feel like more of the parking areas or something should be cleared out already, but I know your guys must have been on the job for hours and hours, and it is, as you point out, when you can't see, it's pretty nerve-wracking work. And I think everybody did a great job, and I've seen all the people out the last couple of days doing with the front loaders and whatever, getting that snow out of there. So kudos to you in particular, and to your whole department, and to the contractors that you hire on for these events. Thank you.
Captain Grotman, you want to give us the public safety
Certainly.
view on this? You guys probably did not have very many cars to tow this time, but I know you had a few.
Yeah, we had that, as the commissioner mentioned, we had 21 vehicles that were towed. We had an additional 45 that were illegally parked that we had to, we got into the position to tow, and the people came out and moved the vehicles. We did not, thankfully, have to cite anyone under the Chapter 639 for the travel ban that the governor enacted at 4 o'clock on Friday. We did just respond to a lot of stranded vehicles, and it was through the commissioner that we will pull most of them out. We did, on Friday, I made a request to the National Guard because of the I guess the intensity of the snowstorm to send some assets our way. They were able to send up Humvees, and they actually did assist us getting up to the top of Walnut Hill on a significant medical that involved a young child. They then subsequently went back to the Department of Public Works, where the commissioner fed them, and then their Humvee broke down.
I'm not sure
And
that's...
they weren't very upset. They were not upset because they were going south to the Dartmouth area where everyone was out of power, so they were lucky.
They were happy to be stranded, is what you're telling me.
Yes, they were very
Okay,
happy,
all right.
actually. We did issue 79 parking tickets, and there were some very other minor things, but the town worked really well, and that EOC that we, several years ago when the chief first got me involved in it, I was a little hesitant because it didn't seem like you could run two things at once. And we started with very small stuff, and now it was very easy, and some of the people that visited were very impressed, but working with the folks up there and Detective Raskin and Hatchett and some of the other folks, it really did go very well. And a lot said to the town, because in 1978, I was here too, and I was 14, and my father owned a tow company in the town of Brookline at the time. And they had to send the National Guard up to our house, up on the Parkway, to get us because nobody could move. And so my father, my brothers, my three other brothers, he took us, and he made us drive tow trucks to tow the cars because none of the workers could get into Brookline. So there were hundreds upon hundreds of cars towed, and the DPW had a ton more people. So it was remarkable for the town the way it handled it. The last thing I will mention, the last 2 mornings have been not great as far as the commute going into the Longwood Medical area. Through a lot of phone calls and discussions, we've been able to alleviate what we think is 90% of the problem, which was the parking lane as well as the right turn lane on Brookline Ave going onto Longwood Ave was plowed in, and there was disagreements between the City of Boston, Masco, and the Merchants Association whose responsibility it was. This afternoon, I was able to speak with everyone, and so tonight it will all be removed. So the commute tomorrow morning should be only terrible instead of
Speaking of Route 9, someone asked me this question, and I thought I knew the answer, but then I stopped and said I should get an actual correct answer. Who is responsible for plowing Route 9? Isn't that a state highway?
It is, yes.
Okay, so in fact, we, the town, do not plow Route 9.
Well, we actually do.
But we
a lot
do
of
some, I
times.
know.
Yes,
Yeah.
only because through the years, we've found that when the snow falls heavily, from Cypress Street up towards Sumner, there's that hill that
Right.
the state doesn't get into the city until later in the day, and by then we have cars stranded there.
Right.
So the commissioner and Kevin Johnson have helped us for a long time. But the state owns all the way down to High Street, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, all the way to High Street.
Right. And I have another question which has to do with sidewalks, and particularly because I happen to cross Route 9 at High Street. It wasn't clear to me who is responsible for making sure that there's pedestrian access, and I know property owners are meant to clear their sidewalks. Well, on that intersection, one corner is a fire station, chief. One corner is, two corners are commercial. I guess three corners are commercial. But it was very clear to me that people were in the street trying to get across. I mean, they weren't able to cross at the crosswalk, is what I'm trying to say. And so my question simply is, in a case like that, is the owner of the abutting sidewalk meant to at least make a hole in that berm so that you can get out?
Yes, ma'am.
That's their
And the
responsibility.
fire department was out there today. I saw them out there today, Station 7, I think it is, the one in the village. Oh, Station,
Yeah.
Station 1, I believe, actually.
Right.
Again, the commissioner's doing a lot of work tonight and tomorrow night, too, so.
But in those cases, if it's commercial property, which three of those corners are, presumably it's the property owner who should have
Yes, it is.
both cleared the sidewalk, but the part I'm really talking about is the plows with their huge berms. If the sidewalk inside is clear, it still isn't, how do you get out?
We will be removing those eventually, all of those piles on all the corners.
Right.
We will be taking them out. It's just that because of the nature of this storm,
Right.
we've had other priorities right now. But
I understand, Commissioner, what I'm really trying to do is figure out if there's some way we could get the message to the property owners who did clear the walkway, the sidewalk, that it would be nice if they would, just cut a little channel and let people get out to the crosswalk. That's all. Maybe we can work on that in your telephone message next time.
So I'd like to add my thanks and congratulations to the departments too, and I'll just tell you, I took a little trip Sunday morning. I had to run a quick errand in Coolidge Corner, and I actually counted from on the round trip. I saw 8 different sites where town departments were hard at work. I thought that the amount of boots on the ground that was mustered was truly impressive, and the coordination of all that. We have the 3 of you to thank, including Chief Ford over there too. I think you should be standing up at the podium too, because 2 of those sites I saw were firefighting crews. They were out there digging out hydrants, and in one case, so I don't know exactly what was going on, but we had an engine out on Buckminster Road in my neighborhood for some type of emergency was going on there. And so the fire department, too, is to be commended for the incredible effort here. And I just would ask home viewers to do what the same thing that the constituent that Selectman DeWitt just read did, which is join us in thanking our departments for dealing with a very extreme situation in a very efficient and thorough manner.
Okay.
Just
Gonna do
one
the-
quick question for Captain Grootman. So I did have a call from somebody who was kind of irate about the driving ban and was saying, well, what if people had medical emergencies? And the answer is that they should call 911 if they have a medical emergency, and you would help them get to where they needed to be.
Yes, we expected there to be some pushback, especially Massachusetts being Massachusetts. There's a driving ban, but the reality of 1978, where all the folks died out on 128, once those cars break down in the middle of the roadway, that ends our ability to clear anything, and it also decreases our ability to rescue folks. So if there was issues, and there were, because we had 2 doctors call from a street, which I don't really want to mention, and said, listen, I'm going to call at X hospital and another hospital, and we told them, with the driving ban, call us and we'll get you to the hospital right away. And so that's really what that was for, to make sure that the emergency personnel could get where they wanted to, and the Department of Public Works throughout the state could clear the roadways, so we would avert another 1978. And anyone who really wants evidence of it needs to only look at this storm at the Long Island Parkway, I think it is, and how badly people were there for days and broken down, and so it really worked well.
Yes, I think we should also acknowledge the governor's role in this. It was a very well-coordinated statewide effort. Okay, we ready to actually vote some money?
Well, haven't explained it to you
Oh,
yet.
please then, do explain.
Before I do, I would also
Okay.
like to shout out to Chief Ford. The men have been out there helping us clear hydrants. You know, in addition to clearing, doing our snow plowing duties and clearing snow and removing snow, we had another rainstorm that came in the other day, and, you know, we had to shift some of our focus to opening up catch basins to avoid some flooding. And we're also very concerned about our fire hydrants. You know, a lot of those were buried in the snowbanks, so between the fire department and our water and sewer division, they've been out there opening up fire hydrants. So this was really a joint effort with everybody involved, and I want to thank the chief for that. I too was here in 1978. I was working for the town of Brookline in 1978, and I will tell you, because I looked this up today, there were 286 employees in the Public Works Department in 1978. Today there are 168. So that's the difference.
And I'm so glad that you had those figures to absolutely confirm what our writer said, because I think that's terribly important. People just don't understand how much has been done with fewer people, fewer feet on the ground. It's very impressive.
So having said all of that, I will tell you now that we are running deficit in snow and ice, in our snow and ice budget.
Surprise.
We do appropriate about $420,000 in the snow and ice budget. Prior to this storm, we had expended about $220,000 of it. This particular storm, up until today, not including the snow removal operation that's going to take place tonight and tomorrow, we have expended $392,000 just on this storm alone. If you just take those numbers, I'll just give you a quick breakdown. We spent on this particular storm $172,000 in overtime, $155,000 in contractual services, and about $53,000 in supplies. The bottom line is that the snow and ice budget right now is in deficit by about $202,000, not including the estimates for going forward over the next 2 nights. So as I say to you, whenever we get into these situations, it requires a reserve fund transfer, but more often, we would recommend that the board invoke Chapter 44, Section 31D of Massachusetts General Law, which then allows the Public Works Department to overspend their snow and ice budget going forward. We will continue to do that with normal operations. And then at the end of the snow season, when we have exact figures as to what the season cost us, and we have a better idea of surpluses that may exist in the rest of the department budget, we can reconcile some of that deficit with department surpluses and then come back before you in the spring for a reserve fund transfer for the balance.
Okay. Question?
I guess for Mr. Kleckner, any reason why we wouldn't do the deficit spending this year?
No, I think it's important. We could, I suppose, do a series of reserve fund transfers, but we did meet with the advisory committee earlier tonight, and they were supportive of it, so I see no reason. I think it's a prudent way to go forward.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I actually can speak to this, because when I was on the advisory committee, I pushed for them to do it this way, because they used to do it where they'd just come for the reserve fund transfers right away, and it meant that this department ate heavily into the reserve fund, but yet at the end of the year, they often had money in some other accounts, and so it affected free cash going forward and other departments' abilities, to get money out of the reserve fund and that sort of thing. So I was one of the people who urged them to go to this system, and I think it's
Good. That's my
the better way to
inclination,
go.
too. Just wanted to make sure there was no reason why this year
No,
would be
it
different.
actually is good. It's a good procedure, and it has exactly the effect that Selectman Daley said of reconciling any surpluses at the end, so you draw down less from the reserve fund. Okay.
Captain Grotman has reminded me of one last caveat that we just need to mention to the board. There is a possibility of a FEMA reimbursement.
Oh.
Perhaps, we're not sure yet, but we are through the
Okay.
police department, Detective Raskin.
Well,
Another reason
we'll
to do that.
definitely pay attention to see whether that should be available to us.
If there's
Absolutely.
money out there
We'll-
for us, we will
Absolutely.
certainly pursue
We'll
it.
go for it. Okay, then I will move that we invoke Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 31D, which will allow the Department of Public Works to expend funds in excess of the FY 2013 budget appropriation for snow and ice control. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
go home and get some sleep, Commissioner. Get your voice back. Okay, now we have to go back to the miscellaneous calendar. There are 3 temporary liquor license requests, which, unless someone wants to hold one, I will move that we grant temporary liquor licenses to the Vine Ripe Grill for February 16th, February 28th, and March 15th. I also move that we grant a temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Lars Anderson Auto Museum for February 21st, and a temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Brookline Council on Aging in connection with a Brookline Community Foundation grantee reception on February 26th. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. And now Chief Ford, I think you have the next item.
Good evening, Paul Ford, Fire Chief.
And
How's everyone tonight?
And we hope that you have all of your hydrants dug out.
Well, they aren't, but we're working on it.
Okay, all right.
Well, I'm before you tonight to request authorization to fill some vacancies that we have. As you're aware, we had a recruit class last August, September-ish, graduated in October. At that time, we ended up with two vacancies by the end of that class. With some recent retirements, the end of last year and several this year, we are actually at 7 vacancies as we speak, with another vacancy looming any day and the possibility of at least another one. We are budgeted for 154 positions. So again, right now we're down 7, but I do expect absolutely an 8th, possibly a 9th or more. So as I asked last year when I came before you, I would like to have authorization to fill those vacancies, whatever they are, up to our budgeted 154. It's a very long process when we deal with civil service, and we purposely have extra candidates in the mix. That way, if we do have another vacancy, someone retires next month, we won't get this class off until June at best. So that way we can fill any unexpected vacancies that do crop up between now and then.
Okay, questions for the chief? Well, we definitely support your ability to fill those vacancies in a timely fashion. So if we have no questions from members of the board, I will move that we authorize Chief Ford to solicit a list from the Department of Human Resources to fill 7 firefighter vacancies.
I think what he's asking for is more than 7, because he might have more openings.
Oh, okay, well,
But
I'm,
it's just the list. He's
then
not-
request a list to fill firefighter vacancies. How's that?
That sounds terrific.
Okay, go for it. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you very much.
Recruit successfully and as many as you need.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next item is taxi medallions. Oh, okay, Mr. Cronin, you have some
Well, actually, there's
comments you
not,
want to make?
I can bring you up to date.
Okay, why don't
Unfortunately,
you, while
one,
Mr. Cronin's getting his legs on his legs. Come on, you can stand there.
one casualty
Yeah.
of Nemo was a meeting Monday afternoon by the people who are working on the taxi medallion issue. So we're getting very close to a point where we're ready to roll out a program, and I think I'll reserve any other comment until that date. But in the meantime, it's necessary to make arrangements for our consultant to continue to contribute, and Mr. Cronin will speak to that.
Okay, Mr. Cronin, you have the floor.
So it's basically phase 2 of the consulting project, and this is to basically get to a final recommendation point to the board, and then, once the board makes a decision, to basically manage the process to go live with medallions, the whole procurement process, which is quite an undertaking. And the time frame is probably 6 to 9 months, depending upon the board. It's 6 months from when the board makes a decision about, yes, this is the plan we want to roll out. So as soon as the board does that, it's about 6 months. So the way the contract structures that, he'll be doing some work for a few months this fiscal year, and then the majority of the work would be in next fiscal year. So, David Giannakakis has, set it up this way so that it's a multi-year contract. And we do have, which will, one little highlight in the financial plan is, we do have $40,000 in the transportation budget specifically for this one-time purpose.
Okay. And just, I don't know who will answer this, but my understanding is that this will lead to an auction process?
Yes.
Okay,
Exactly.
all right. Questions, Selectman Daley?
Yes, so this is a total of $66,000 over 2 years, and I see we're not going out to bid on this contract. We're simply continuing with the same
I think
consultant.
it's an
Is that-
extension. Mr. Giannakakis?
Yes, David Giannakakis, Chief Procurement Officer. The original RFP anticipated that there would be a potential Phase 2 back when we first engaged with Mr. LaCapra back in fiscal year 11, and this would be execution of that Phase 2 to complete the work that he began with the taxi committee and with the town here. So this is, my understanding is that his rates are the same. It is actually somewhat less than the initial contract that we did with him because of the scope and the requirements that were laid out to him by transportation and by the town working group.
So initially, though, we did go out to bid?
Yes, oh yes, we went out to bid, and they were, if I recall, there were 4 respondents, and after an RFP process, Mr. LaCapra was selected then based on his experience, based on what he had done in other locations, and obviously the cost that he would be offering to the town.
And I'll add that Mr. LaCapra's work's been quite excellent, too.
Okay, and I assume there's a significant advantage to having someone who already understands the process we're going through?
It's a very complicated
Complicated,
process.
right.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to add, Selectman Goldstein? No? Then I move that we execute an agreement with Richard LaCapra Consultants for a total of $66,000 with a 2-year term, $26,000 in FY13 and $40,000 in FY14. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman Goldstein?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you all. And now I'm going to sit quietly and cough, but I'm going to let Town Administrator Kleckner take over.
Thank you. I'll move over to the podium.
Because we're going to discuss the financial plan.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board and the public, and I'm very pleased to, my name is Mel Kleckner, Town Administrator, very pleased this evening to present the town's financial plan for fiscal year 2014, and I'm accompanied this evening by Sean Cronin, the Deputy Town Administrator, and Melissa Goff, Assistant Town Administrator, who I think has already been mentioned, are instrumental in putting this very important document together. And we are, as has been mentioned, the recipient of the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for this document by the Government Finance Officers Association for several years, and we certainly believe this year's document is even better because I'll show you some of the innovations that we've created for this year. But I wanted to mention that the financial plan is really three components. First is the budget for next year, a one-year plan for the budget, a balanced budget. Secondly, there's a long-term financial review, a multi-year review of our operating budget, and then there's the capital improvement plan. So all three of those components are incorporated within the financial plan. I'm going to be speaking mostly about the budget for next year, but also touching on those other two areas. The budget is $257.4 million projected in fiscal year 2014. That's all in. That's not only general fund, but also the enterprise and revolving funds. That represents a 2.5% increase over fiscal 2013, but it's important to understand that that is an understatement because in 2013 we had a number of one-time capital improvement projects, not the least of which was our $1.75 million appropriation to the devotion school and also the land, the grant and the grant and the transfer of the Fisher Hill property. So those overstated fiscal 2013, and if you take those out of the equation, the budget increase is more on the order of 4.4% from last year. We have also, we're pleased to show an increase in state aid of $1.75 million, but we are not including the full $2.8 million that would accrue under the governor's plan. And I want to just mention that we would very much like to use the governor's plan, and the school department would absolutely love to use the governor's plan. But as you know, the overall budget is reliant on a great deal of a general tax increase in the Commonwealth, which is dependent upon the legislature's willingness to go forward with that. And we just felt that based on our reading of the legislative tea leaves, that may not be totally acceptable. And so we have developed a modified approach and are projecting a healthy increase of $1.75 million in our state aid, which is going to be very helpful, but not the full $2.8 million in the governor's plan. The big story in this budget really is school enrollment. Continues to spiral upwards, creating significant strain on the operating and capital budgets. I think this is really important, since fiscal 2005, enrollment has increased by over 1,100 students, 30%, and that equates to 46 new teaching sections, otherwise known as classrooms for the most part. And this has really forced us to really relook at the town school formula adjustment, and last year we created this offset that helped the school department absorb or not have to absorb the full impact of school enrollment. So we have created a formula adjustment whereby we'll take a projected amount of impact from the school enrollment and share that equally between the school and the town, and we continue to propose to do that in fiscal 14 on a temporary basis. Continuing on the budget overview, the municipal departments are in a position of maintaining programs and services within the amount allocated to it under the revenue formula. We're increasing our departments by 2.4%. That does include any cost increases resulting from step increases or our a reserve for salary adjustments. We are going to continue to follow the fiscal policies that are so important and that prioritize financial reserves. We'll talk about that just a little bit more in a bit. And that includes mostly funding for our pension and OPEB liabilities through not only our increasing ongoing appropriations, but also augmenting those with an investment from our free cash position. This budget will propose to reorganize the Human Relations and Youth Resources Department. As you know, the director of the department, Steve Bressler, has announced his retirement. My proposal, now that it's always, for the several years it's been a one-person department, would be to consolidate that into the health department. My proposal is to deal with the staff and the organization of the programmatic aspects of the department, but not the commission. I do not propose to eliminate or in any way change the commission, although I should mention that this board and the Human Resources Board and the commission are engaged in a discussion about the overall roles and responsibilities of the commission. We had a very strong free cash position, which allowed us to move things in our capital improvement, add money to the capital improvement program and actually advance projects because, as you may recall, in year 2018 is when the devotion debt really kicks in, and it created a major inability to deal with our CIP. And by adding some money up front in this year, or 2014, bringing projects, advancing them, that will help out the later years when the devotion debt impacts us heavily. So I did want to really emphasize our ability to have some fiscal planning and discipline in our approach. As you know, I came from different towns, came to Brookline 2.5 years ago, and although I've been involved in very progressive communities, there have been no communities that I've worked in that take their budgeting and financial planning as seriously as Brookline, and I'm really proud to be involved in it. And I will tell you that it makes a huge difference. It has helped the town survive the kind of impacts of the recession without major reductions in programs and services, loss of employees, taking money away from our reserves and seeking tax overrides. The town, in many ways, has been able to avoid those kind of responses because of our ability to plan ahead. And I think I can't overstate that enough. We've been able to maintain our AAA bond rating, and as I said, this is really a major result of the solid fiscal discipline and good long-term budget planning, and I sure hope that continues in fiscal 14 and beyond. And some of the key factors that have been able to help us and that contribute to that, we've been able to control our health insurance costs, which was the big budget buster in our budget, by joining the state GIC. Whenever we have received one-time funding, we've been prudently allocating that to one-time sources or to help our long-term liabilities, as opposed to just piling it back into the budget and having that escalate. We already have a structural gap anyway. We've been able to diversify our revenues. We've taken advantage of the hotel and meals tax in particular, which have been really helpful to us. And as you know, you've been involved in negotiating some of the pilots from some of the tax-exempt institutions. We've heavily invested in our energy efficiency and technology, and this is beginning to pay off in the operating and maintenance of our buildings and equipment, and also helping our staff deal with automated processes. I think just looking at the Department of Public Works, and one of the reasons why I think we've been able to absorb such a reduction in staff is because we've invested in our equipment and the technology that's used in snow plowing and other Department of Public Works operations, and that has pervaded throughout our organization and other departments. We have selectively privatized programs and services. We'll continue to look at that. Consolidation and reorganization. The human relations issue is one of those in this year, and we're constantly looking back at the Efficiency Committee and their report to make sure that we've looked at everything that possibly we can do and continue to do that. Moving on, this is just the summary of the budget table, and I'm going to go into a little bit of the revenues and expenditures, but you'll see all those are positive except for the other available funds under the revenue, and then on the special appropriation side, that's basically that fiscal 13 capital issue, but for the most part, every category is growing a bit, and the composite growth is at the 2.5% level. So let me talk about the revenues a bit. Our property tax increase is about 3.2%. The property tax represents over 75% of the town's general fund revenue, and it reflects a stable source of revenue, fortunately. The 3.2% reflects the 2.5% increase under Proposition 2.5, and then some new growth, new construction that we can also tax. Our state aid, I mentioned it before, we're projecting a $1.7 million increase, and that's really great news for us. We're hopeful that the governor's proposal will generate more state aid for us, but we don't think it's reasonable at this point to count on it. As I said, it was the $2.8 million, so we're cutting that back a bit, but still 1.7 is a very healthy increase. Very pleased about that. Local receipts are up by almost $913,000, or 4.3%. This represents the third consecutive year of an increase, and I think, if anything, really shows that we're beyond the worst of the recessionary economic times. Local receipts are very impacted by the economy, sale of motor vehicles, building activity, and so on. Interestingly, we're still not at the level we were with our local receipts in fiscal 2008. We had a very healthy free cash balance of $9.6 million at the end of fiscal 12. We are recommending that only $7.7 million of that be used for our CIP and other uses that are talked about from our financial policies, and that will help us stay above the 10% level that we think is so important and that the Fiscal Planning Committee solidified and the board approved in your amendment of our financial policies. I think you remember last year we were put on a watch list by Moody's because of the congressional debt issue at the federal level. We were taken off the watch list and restored our AAA, and I think personally, and I talked to the Moody's representative, so I know that this factor was a major factor in giving the town the benefit of the doubt there. Other available funds will decrease by more than $5 million, but again, I mentioned that that's the result of some additional funding in 2013 for CIP projects. On the expenditure side, municipal department's up by 2.4%. That's all in, including a salary reserve. School department is up by 4.4% based on the revenue allocation formula, and this is also inclusive of negotiated salary increases. We do expect, possibly not next year, but over time, continued erosion of our CDBG funding, and so we've taken an opportunity within the municipal account to transfer some staff expenses back onto the general fund and away from the federal grant, because we just expect that those will go away when the grant is reduced. Our health insurance, the overall budget's up by 7.4%, but we're projecting a 5% GIC rate increase. We do build in some additional enrollment based on, in Massachusetts, when you retire, you're still covered under health insurance. So when we replace positions, we're really adding to the overall enrollment, and given the school teacher enrollment increases because of the enrollment, we do have to build in some additional bodies into the health insurance count. We are continuing our OPEB and plan as well as our pension plan, not only by increasing the amount we annually put into the budget, but also by allocating additional money from free cash. I think we'll get to that a little bit more in detail later on. And our enterprises, which represent our golf course and our water and sewer operations, are going up by 2.8% in fiscal 14. So I want to move on to some major policy issues and initiatives. I always feel that the financial plan and the budget is not just a document that puts together numbers and balances numbers, but it's a tool. It's a management tool, and we use that extensively throughout the year. We use the budget as a way to engage with departments, talk about their goals and objectives, and try to initiate change. Some of it comes to us that we don't create, and one of those is the Human Relations and Youth Resources Reorganization. I mentioned that Steve Russell's retiring effective in April, and as you know, this became over time a one-person department. I don't like one-person departments. To me, that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't take advantage of the economies of scale and the ability for like departments and programs to collaborate. And so my proposal is to consolidate the Human Relations Department and staff into the Health Department. And my proposal specifically is to upgrade the Human Services Coordinator position in the Health Department. The current incumbent is Lloyd Gelano, who I believe you know, and add a professional support staff person, probably a social worker, to support the programs. So this not only enables us to deal with human relations issues, support the commission, support human relations and youth services program, but also coordinate that with existing human service programs that are already done in the health department. So this is a proposal that I will be going over in more detail as we go forward in the budget process. I do want to make it very clear, however, that my proposal does not eliminate the Human Relations and Youth Resources Commission. They will continue to operate, obviously, within the dialogue that the Board of Selectmen and the Human Resources Board are involved in with them going forward. Moving on, open government and performance management. This is probably the area we've spent the most on initiating ourselves. I introduced a goals and objectives process last year with the department heads, and this whole area, I think, feeds perfectly into that. The whole area of open government performance management is one that we've experimented a lot with. We've done a lot trying to figure out the best fit for us. You know that we've developed some really good tools, online tools, to help engage our citizenry. Our Brook Online suite of applications, I think, have been very successful. I mentioned earlier this evening that we've been using social media a whole lot more, Twitter and Facebook. And then we are going to be pursuing an open checkbook, which is basically an online application where our residents and anybody can go online and drill down and see where we're spending our money. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a really good open checkbook site. You should check it out. And we have been just, I believe today, we're notified that we were accepted a grant. We filed a grant with some other cities and towns led by the city of Woburn, who are all Munis communities, to work with Munis to try to develop an open checkbook application. And I'm pleased to report that we were accepted, and we hope to implement an open checkbook application sometime in the future. Performance measurement, there's a lot of fads that come and go in management and budgeting. Performance measurement, I believe, is not a fad, but it's here to stay. It's a very logical approach to linking goals and objectives and creating measurements that help us measure whether we're making progress towards reaching those goals and objectives. We were able to participate last year in the Collins Center, UMass Boston Collins Center StatNet program. Our police and public works department were working in those and developed a lot of good skills on how to measure their performance. And with those departments and with the human resources department, we think we're going to be able to help other departments do that. You will notice in the book this year that we have beginning to evolve from basic workload indicators to performance measures, effectiveness and efficiency measures. So for example, in the past we might have measured how many miles of road we plowed. With this kind of measure, we're trying to drill down and talk about how quickly or how effectively we did that. And so you will notice, and I use some examples in section I, page 12, I believe.
Yes.
Where just selected some key indicators that give you an example of how we've moved from just basic workload indicators to more performance measures. But you will notice that throughout every budget, I require department heads to develop at least 3 performance measures. So when you look at their workload indicators, you'll notice that there are at least 3 performance measures that are trying to move towards that process. And then we are proposing to participate in the National Citizen Survey next year. The National Citizen Survey is a survey that's been produced in cooperation with the ICMA, the International City Management Association, and the National League of Cities. It's a survey that's developed for any city or town in the country. We are able to tailor it a bit, but not much, because it's a survey that's already been tested in terms of its statistical validity and its sample size and so on. The town of Needham and the town of Andover in Massachusetts have used it very successfully, and I've talked to my colleagues in those communities. And we think that in addition to measuring ourselves, our statistics, and our performance, what's more important than to know how our citizens feel about our programs and services and how we stack up against all the other cities and towns who have done this survey. So we're going to be producing or participating in the National Citizen Survey next year as part of this effort. And then finally, you may have heard of a phrase called a dashboard. I hadn't heard about it until a few months ago, but it's becoming a very popular way for an organization to, in a snapshot, like your vehicle's dashboard, you can kind of look, see how you're doing, how fast you're going, how much gas you've got, and how many miles you've gone, and so forth. Well, the dashboard concept is similar, taking a snapshot of a town, or in a department's case, taking a snapshot of the department and seeing how we're doing, measuring our progress there. And if you look on I-1-14, we've created a table. A lot of dashboards are really fancy looking. We're starting slow, putting together a table, but I've looked at and developed indicators for various major categories of our community, our quality of our community, our fiscal strength, public safety, public health, and education. So that's another innovation that we're trying to do within the performance management and open government section. Continuing on policy initiatives, the school enrollment I've mentioned before, but bears mentioning again. 660 new kindergarten students will be coming to our school system next year. Our K-8 enrollment will increase by 240 to over 5,000 students. Shortly, those students will be heading into the high school. We'll have to absorb that growth. We currently have 1,769 students. That will increase to 2,500 within 10 years. Our CIP is looking at dealing with the school enrollment issue on the short and long-term plans. We're continuing our classroom conversion. The school department is aggressively pursuing leases with private institutions, mostly temples, in the town to house pre-K classrooms, which will then in turn create capacity for our K-12 or K-8. We hope in 2014 to be reusing the old Lincoln School. It's not clear at this point whether that will be a neighborhood school, not likely, but probably more like a concept school. And for those of you who have been following the B-Space Committee, you'll know that that's a major focus of their effort. And then we've started the high school feasibility study process that will deal with that. The B-Space Committee is exploring concepts and solutions, but I think it's important to say that not only is school enrollment increases a capital challenge, but it'll be an operating budget challenge. And the B-Space Committee is doing sort of the initial work to document some of these operating budget issues so that in the event that the town needs to seek additional revenue, and we'll talk about that in a bit with a long-term outlook, that it will have those measures and analysis completed. Moving on to financial reserves and the long-term liabilities, we've mentioned those before, but two major things: maintenance of adequate reserves and adoption of long-term liability funding policy. So I've already mentioned that our unreserved fund balance is now in excess of 10%, and that's a Moody's informal threshold, and we want to continue to keep it above that 10%, and then funding our pensions and OPEBs, using not only base operating allocation, in some cases use of dedicated revenue that's coming in, and then clearly using our free cash to help support that. We've made a lot of progress there, although, as you know, the pensions, our pension funding schedule took a big hit with the investment performance. We invest our money long-term in the equities market, and I don't have to tell you how that suffered in the last few years, and we took a hit. And so we're trying to get back into that funding basis. We had to add 2 years back onto it. We'd like to get back to 2028, is it, Sean? And then we'd also like to reduce our estimate of what we earn. I think we're now down to 7.75%. We might even want to bring that down even further. And by putting money into the pension fund, we're able to do that. On the payroll system, I talked about doing some contracting out. Well, in this case, we've been contracting out our payroll system, but I believe we can save money by bringing it in-house. And so we're currently in the process of implementing a payroll system using our Munis system. We do have to invest in a human resource component or module to the system, which actually I find to be positive, because not only does it help us do our payroll, but it also helps create some HR automation and tools that would be a good start to see how we can invest in those in the future. And we achieve our financial control. I know Selectman Daly is aware that our auditors made a finding that we can't have the same people inputting the payroll as who's cutting the checks. And so this bringing a payroll system in-house and creating this Munis system will help us segregate those duties in the future. And the last slide on policy issues and initiatives, I joked with the advisory committee earlier that we couldn't have a budget without talking about parking meters, and we are implementing the changes to the parking meter system. We did conclude our procurement process, and it was very favorable. So we are converting all of our on-street multi-space kiosks to single-space digital meters. We're retaining the multi-space units within the municipal lots, but converting them to a pay-by-space, and we're also acquiring new enforcement technology for our meter personnel that will really be save them time and energy and hopefully increase our revenue, although that's not the whole point of it. We're investing in green technology, and that's achieved through the CIP, clearly, the Green Communities Program. You heard about that earlier this evening in our operating budget. In fiscal 14, our big focus will be expanding the LED streetlight experiment. We did an experiment with LED street lighting. I think it's proved to be great. Certainly the cost, the energy costs are lower, but the performance has been very positive, and so we're really going to expand that program through our CIP. And we're also working with the MAPC's Regional Solar Energy Initiative to explore ways that we can add solar energy to our projects, or even some of our existing buildings with solar energy. Wanted to mention that I've been engaged in an ongoing discussion with the cemetery trustees about using their significant revenue and trust fund income. We did able to increase the amount of money that's going to offset our operating budget from $50,000 to $75,000, and I appreciate that very much, and also a commitment from them to help fund major capital improvements to the cemetery in the out years using these revenues. Now, we are concerned that we don't want to violate any principles or laws, certainly, and so we are committed to doing a legal review of all the cemetery trust funds, a very complicated area of law. But I did want to mention that we are working cooperatively with the trustees. And we're also working with a more consolidated infrastructure for our work order system, whereby we're using a ticket system to create work order requests and then integrating that with our assets and planning for those. I'd like to just conclude my section and then turn it over to Mr. Cronin to talk about the long-range financial plan. It's really critical to take a longer outlook on our financial and budget issues, and we do that every year. It's consistent with our long-range capital planning process. I don't know how you can plan next year without kind of looking a few years out to make sure we understand all the issues and opportunities. The plan is definitely based on a number of assumptions, and there are a long list of them. But the one thing I did want to mention is that we are projecting deficits that range and sort of accumulate and increase over time. But I did want to say that the nature of long-term budgeting is that it's cumulative and conservative, but in fact, we do have to balance our budget every year, so it's not perhaps as bad as it might look, but we still think it's important to do it and to show that we do have a structural gap between our revenue growth and our expenditure growth long-term. That's going to get worse with the school enrollment. So it's really important to take a long-term look at our financial plan. And in the event that we do have to, when we do have to balance the budget and we do have that gap, our goal is to eliminate that gap in a way that balances revenue growth. And we're going to have to talk, as I mentioned earlier, with the B-Space about potential tax overrides in the future, but also expenditure control. With that, I'd like to ask, perhaps maybe if I just ask if you have any general questions now, or I can move to Sean and then we can do all the questions afterwards, whatever your pleasure, Madam Chairman.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Carry on.
All right, in that case, I'm going to turn it over to Sean Cronin, who will go into more details, a lot of details about what I've summarized. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail. That was a fantastic overview executive overview of what's in the budget. I want to thank Mel. A lot of the, well, not all, a lot of the performance management initiative in the dashboard was driven by Mel and made Melissa and I and all the department heads work pretty hard at that. It's not perfect yet, but we're confident we'll have a product to put on the web over time, and that citizen survey is a really exciting initiative. I think that, I know since I've been here, we really haven't done something that formal, so this will be a really good indicator of how good of a job the town's doing.
You can explain SMART?
Mel can explain SMART. And also thank Melissa, as I say every year, not just the book, that couldn't be done without Melissa, but I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be balancing the budget without Melissa. Just a ton of work that's done that I don't think gets the credit.
I shouldn't interrupt you, but I will say I was tremendously impressed to find I guess it's a screenshot of one of the Twitter notices that went out during the storm, which tells me this thing was printed yesterday.
We joked about that exact thing yesterday. Yeah. So Melissa was cranking away and getting this all done. Yep, so thank you, Melissa. So just in broad overview, this is a grid that shows the $257 million financial plan by fund. Obviously, the biggest is our general fund, $222 million, and then you see our enterprise funds, revolving funds, and then some of the smaller funds that, again, total the $257 million. This is a chart we use each year because if you simply take the school's appropriation and divide it by revenue, you'll come somewhere about 33%, 35%. And I think everybody knows we spend a lot more than 35% on the schools. It's a priority of the town, something the town's very proud of. So what we do here is we pull all the expenses from the town side of the budget and put it into the school, add it to the school appropriation to see what the total share of the pie is. So you add benefits, which are over $20 million, debt service, which is $5 million, building costs, repair, maintenance, utilities, et cetera, which is $4 or $5 million. You pull all those things together, and you see that the schools make up about 55% of the total expenditure pie. In terms of the general fund, we have $229 million of revenue. When you back out $8 million of so-called non-appropriated expenses, you have $221 million to appropriate. And as Mel mentioned, and I think the version of this you have has some wrong numbers there. I fixed this, I noticed it. So the one that's online is right. So the real growth, I think yours has 102.4% growth. Yeah, that's a mistake, obviously. So this is the right one. So as Mel mentioned earlier, the town budget, the town departments are growing 2.4%, inclusive of salary reserves. The schools are growing 4.4%. And then everything else, which are benefits, debt service, reserves, are growing 4.8%. 4.8 million, 8.3%. And then you have the revenue finance CIP of 8.58 million, which is down $4+ million, again, for the reason that Mel talked about, the one-time monies in fiscal 13. And most importantly, it's balanced, which is what you're supposed to have. So in terms of revenue, as is the case every year, the largest growth factor is property taxes. That is 2.5% plus new growth, which is estimated at 1.6 million. Local receipts, I'll get into that the next slide. State aid, Mel talked about what we're doing in terms of not assuming the full growth of the governor's budget, but assuming some growth. And then free cash, I'll get into that a little bit. But what I want to do just quickly is get to the point that Mel mentioned about how you can't say that the revenue's really grown just 2.4%. When you back out one-time monies, and this is our standard how you calculate revenue, operating revenue table, you'll see that the true growth is 4.4%, which is what you'd expect in the town's budget. In terms of property tax, each year we remind folks of how important new growth is. I know sometimes it can be a touchy subject because it's development and there's neighborhood issues and those types of things, but new growth plays a huge role, has played a huge role in the town's ability to do the stuff that we talked about, not laying off employees, not cutting back on services. If you look here, what this shows you is over the last 15 years, an additional $30 million above and beyond the Prop 2.5 limit has been generated. And just to put that in perspective, if you look at a couple of these years, 97%, 92%, et cetera, what that's telling you is we almost doubled our annual property tax levy. I don't know of many communities, Cambridge is probably an exception, but there's not many communities that have new growth to this extent. And that has really played a large role in our ability to maintain the level of services that we have. The graph to the right, what this shows is just a trend where we had a downward trend here This blip here had to do to just simply converting the Longwood Towers into condos. So if you back that out, it was actually right about here. So you see the downward trend. The last couple of years, we've seen a spike upward, which is a good trend. And then 14, you see the estimate, admittedly conservative estimate of $1.6 million. State aid, already talked about it. I'll get into Chapter 70 actually in the next slide. But what this shows is the roller coaster that is state aid. It's basically an indicator of the overall economy. When the economy's bad, the state has budget deficits. When they have budget deficits, they understandably cut back local aid. And you can see the big hits that the town took in the early 2000s, got some back, and then took another very significant hit back in 2010. So just to talk about Chapter 70 for a bit, it's a very complicated formula. I admit I understand maybe half of it. I know the end result, which is that if the aggregate wealth model is followed, Brookline will benefit to the tune of $2.8 million, and that's what the governor's budget proposed. And the way this works is, I'm just going to go to the picture because for me this is easier. So if you look at this, what this shows is there's two factors in the formula: foundation budget, which is a calculation of a whole bunch of factors that says this is what you need to spend, and then there's a required net school spending. And what's important is, as soon as foundation equals required net school spending, you then become a foundation aid community. And what that basically means is Chapter 70 needs to fill the gap. And that's shown in this picture here. So just starting over here, this was a calculation for FY12. Our FY11 Chapter 70 aid was just under $7 million. You see here that the required contribution was less than foundation, so we didn't get any growth in our Chapter 70 budget. Then you carry that $6 million over to the base for 12, and then what you see here is that foundation aid grew from $5.3 million to $8.9 million, which is greater than Chapter 70. So they had to basically use $2 million of Chapter 70 money to get from 6.9 up to 8.9. So last year, current fiscal year I should say, we had a benefit of $2 million of growth in the Chapter 70 budget. So what the governor's proposed is to go all the way up to that 17.5% figure. The aggregate wealth model says that every community should have Chapter 70 be equivalent to at least 17.5% of the foundation budget. In other words, the state needs to pay for 17.5% of your foundation budget. Brookline had been below that. I believe in 11 we were around 12%. In fiscal 12 we were around 12%. Fiscal 14 we were around 14%. The governor's budget brings all the communities like Brookline, there's 40 or 50 I think, school districts, up to 17.5%. That's why there's such a significant growth of $2.8 million. So the worry that Mel talked about earlier of the governor's budget that included the $1.9 billion tax package, if that's not included in its entirety, then there might not be enough revenue to fully fund the aggregate wealth model. So it wouldn't be too prudent to assume $2.8 million growth in Chapter 70 when we know that in some way, shape, or form, getting to 17.5% depends upon some additional revenue. So for me, that's the easiest way to explain what goes on with Chapter 70. Again, there's a whole bunch of calculations that go on behind that I just don't know about, but to me, this shows how we've benefited over the last couple of years for Chapter 70. In terms of local receipts, we're seeing growth of $900,000 from a couple sources. Motor vehicle excise, we had a very good first commitment for this fiscal year, which then obviously trends forward into next fiscal year. Local option taxes, $200,000. We're estimating $100,000 growth in meals tax and $100,000 in lodging taxes. This fiscal year, those have been very good performing revenue sources for us. Parking tickets, this is one that I think if you look at it in a graph, it fluctuates for a whole host of reasons. But we're confident after the last 12 months of data that we can increase this estimate to by $200,000 for fiscal 14. This one I just want to explain a bit. Benefits reimbursement are assessments on other non-general fund funds that support personnel. The biggest change here is that the schools are assessing a couple of their special revenue funds an additional $150,000. So that comes into the general fund as a form of revenue, which then gives the schools additional budget capacity. So it's this kind of convoluted way, but the schools are basically saying, look, in their budget crunch that they have, they're looking at all of their funds, and they're saying that these funds need to pay for their benefits, which in turn gets them additional revenue, additional budget capacity. So on paper, you see this significant increase in benefits reimbursement. The other thing I'll mention is Medicare Part D. Fiscal 13 was the first year we got that from the GIC. We estimated 300,000. It came in at over 400,000, which allows us to increase this estimate by 100,000 in fiscal 14. Free cash, as Mel mentioned, $9.7 million certified, and what's being recommended is the following. And this sequencing follows literally to the number free cash policy that was approved by the board, a revised policy a couple of years ago. So the way this flows is there's the certification, $9.65 million. The first priority is funding a portion of our operating budget reserve. Operating reserve is 1% of revenue, which is basically $2 million. And 25% of that comes from free cash. Then the fund balance situation that Mel had spoken about as well. What we're recommending is basically using $2.2 million of free cash to maintain and hopefully improve that situation. And that's broken into two pieces. Leaving $2 million unappropriated, which is what we've done the last couple of years. We've left $1.75 million unappropriated each of the last 2 years. But then actually depositing $250,000 into the stabilization fund, which would get that balance just above $6 million in that fund, which is all part of the fund balance calculation that the financials include. Then we have to fund our liability reserve, which is 1% of prior year net revenue. That fluctuates depending upon how much in the prior year that fund's used, so we need $154,000 for that. Capital improvements, we have a 6% CIP policy, and to that, we bring it up to 7.5% by using free cash. So what that costs you, so to speak, is $3 million of free cash is what's required to get you to that full 7.5% level. And then the last priority in this sequencing is affordable housing. And the policy says if the trust fund balance is less than $5 million, which it is, 15% of what's left after these first four priorities goes to the trust fund. And that math comes out to $555,000. So there's 6.5 minus 9.6, there's 3.1 left. And what the town administrator is recommending in the financial plan is adding to the CIP basically $1.8 million, primarily to bring forward a number of projects so that we take some of the stress off the budget in the out years. A $500,000 cash infusion in both the OPEB fund and pension funds so that those monies can be invested. Workers' comp and unemployment, augmenting those fund balances because both of them, well, workers' comp took a pretty significant hit in fiscal 12, which is why we're actually increasing the base budget in 14 and infusion of $270,000 to bring the fund balance up. And unemployment, the fund balance is slightly low, and we want to bring up that as well. So that's how all of the $9.65 million is used. I don't want to say spent because $2 million of it is actually unappropriated, and then $250,000 goes into a fund that hopefully isn't spent as the stabilization fund. So to the fund balance discussion, as you see back in the early 90s, very low position, a lot of improvement was made up to over 17% of revenue, and then you can see the downward trend. And we worked with the Fiscal Policy Review Committee and made sure that undesignated fund balance or unreserved fund balance became a priority of the town. And the steps that we've taken in the last couple of years, you can see that there's an improvement there. And we feel as though by leaving $2 million unappropriated and putting $250,000 in the stabilization fund, that we at least maintain, if not improve, that metric. Mel referenced the discussions that we've had with the cemetery trustees. This just kind of puts a picture to it. Since fiscal 99, they've reimbursed the general fund $50,000 because the general fund budget includes the cemetery budget. That's about 15% of all-in costs, meaning benefits included. So what we've been talking about is trying to increase that reimbursement to the general fund, just like we've talked about cost recovery for recreation, full cost recovery for golf, full cost recovery for water and sewer. Wanted to try and increase the cost recovery for this operation. So the cemetery trustees have approved a $25,000 increase, which is a 50% increase into the reimbursement. That gets you up to 25% of operation. And as Mel said, there'll be probably further dialogue about how they allocate or how they split their revenue that they get now between their various funds, with an eye toward maybe being able to increase this cost recovery level. On to the expenditure side, you can see that benefits are the largest growing portion of the budget, $4.7 million. Of that, group health is $1.7 million, pensions is $1.6 million, and OPEBs is $912,000, workers' comp is $520,000. All of those ones that I mentioned are being augmented in some way, shape, or form, so the numbers are even greater, and I'll get into the OPEB one and the pension one in a minute. I mentioned we're infusion of free cash for workers' comp to bring that fund balance up. And I'll talk about OPEBs and pensions in a second. School budget, the biggest drivers there are the new collective bargaining agreement that they have, special education costs, enrollment growth, and step increases. On the town side, the $1.5 million, $950,000 of that is the collective bargaining reserve, and $155,000 of that is steps. And then $100,000 is capital outlay. What we've done in this budget is there's some vehicle replacements, there's some fire equipment, not CIP capital, but ongoing operating budget capital outlay that we've built up into this. So if you look at capital outlay 14 versus 13, you see there's about a $100,000 increase.
I hate to interrupt, but would you put the payroll system, whatever software, hardware was necessary, is that part of that sort of, where do you put that?
That's actually a service, because we're paying for a module which has an annual service.
Okay, so it's contracted services.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. And then, just looking at the CIP for a second in here, breaks it out. This is a 6% policy, so people might wonder what's the growth annually. It's about $500,000 to maintain that 6% policy. The free cash supported piece, there's an additional $900,000 more than what was spent last year from free cash, going back to that previous slide. The other CIP, these are the one-time monies that Mel spoke about that we don't have in fiscal 14. And then debt exclusion, I pulled this out this year because fiscal 13 is the last year of the old New Lincoln School debt service. So in 14, the debt service goes away and the additional taxing capacity goes away as well. So I pulled that out so you could see how that goes away.
But we would continue to have the debt service on the high school?
Yes, the high school we have for another 10 years. Now this one, I'm not going to run through all of them, but I just want to touch upon a couple of them because the numbers, if you looked at them, you might wonder what's going on within the department. These two are related, IT and finance. And actually, what I should say is, this, I'm going to focus on this column here because it takes out the capital outlay stuff. Because in fiscal 13, there were some departments that had vehicle replacements that don't have it in 14, so their numbers look screwy. So if you look here, over here, this is the column to really focus on. So IT has grown by almost 200,000 and finance is dropping by over 150. The primary reason for that is we're moving telecom expenses, which is $200,000 from the purchasing division of finance into the IT department. I joke with the CIO that virtually everything now seems to be dependent upon IT since we've moved to the VoIP system. So it just made budgetary sense to move that money into his budget, and then he has the ability to further leverage that, and he's pretty confident that he can continue to reduce that budget. The budget actually includes a $20,000 reduction from all of the VoIP efforts that have been undertaken the last couple of years. So that's really what's going on there between those two departments. Town clerk, I joked with the advisory committee, we're not slashing Pat's budget. What's going on here is he had 3 elections in the current fiscal year and he only has 1 in fiscal 14. So what you see there is a reduction in the part-time costs associated with running elections. Mel mentioned CDBG. This shows the planning department, pretty much all of that growth, I think it's about 26 of that, is by reducing our reliance upon charging staff off to CD and keeping that on the town side of the budget instead. Building department, this growth is inflated. There's 126,000, and I say that because 65 of that, half of that, more than half of that, is because we took a CIP item, hazmat, and put it into the operating budget. Over the last 2 CIP cycles, we've really focused on trying to pull out any operating type CIP items and put them where they belong in the operating budget. And this was this year's move, so we took that out because they're very small projects, 5,000, 7,000, 10,000. So we thought it made more sense to put it into the operating budget. So that's the primary driver of that increase. And then 2 more. Public Works, growth of 286,000. There's a few things going on there. One, the $40,000 contract for the taxi consultant. That's a one-time expense that's in there. The sanitation contract's increasing. We estimate that to be $40,000. And then we've increased the different supply, vehicle supplies, meter supplies, those types of things, which, to us, really don't think they're that big of a deal, but they're a huge deal for DPW. They spent some time with us this budget cycle showing us what their needs were in those types of accounts, so we've addressed that there. And the other thing I'll mention in their department is, if you remember, you authorized a position in the traffic division for taxi medallions. That was funded 50% in this fiscal year, so we've got to annualize it in fiscal 14, and that's what the difference is there. Health Department and Human Relations.
Haven't seen in a very long time. This is going to be a speech about liberalism in practice. What are the things that he can get the entire country behind that he can accomplish on his own in the next year or two? And then what are the things that are extremely popular that he can try to get Republicans either to go along with?
That budget. There's obviously, when you get with the department heads and you go through their budgets, there'll be a lot more detail going on, but I just want to highlight those in case you're wondering what was going on with such significant increases or decreases. FTEs, you can see the trend over time. We've reduced it by over 4%. And in this fiscal year, what's in there is a growth of 1.7, which comes from 4 things. One I already mentioned, which is the annualization of the full-time clerk in DPW. And I mentioned the 0.49 FTE inspector in the health department. We're moving pest control services in-house in the building department. There's been some issues with the services that or lack thereof, that they've been getting from the contractor. So Charlie wants to move this in-house. So we have money in there for a part-time, again, a 0.49 non-benefit eligible FTE. It might be one person, or it could be a couple people that he'd be able to bring in to perform those services. And the last one is very small, a 0.2 increase in the Council on Aging budget for social worker. Ruth Ann has a retiring higher level social worker that she wants to bring in, at a lower level social worker that works more hours. So budgetarily it's cost neutral, but it does get her some additional hours. So we included that in the budget as well. Health insurance, you've seen this probably too many times. So what I want to just go to is this. Talked about this at the forecast presentation, that we like to remind folks, and I'll speak for myself as an employee, that moving into the GIC has been beneficial, not just to the town budget, but to me. If you look at a family plan, back in fiscal 10, the premium cost for an employee was $5,500. Now it's $3,400. But to be fair, you need to add back in the approximate average of $1,400 or $1,500 of out-of-pocket costs for deductibles and co-pays and those types of things. But still, you got a delta here of $2,100. If you back out $1,400 or $1,500, that's still a savings of $500 or $600, which is a good story. And that's for the average employee. There are obviously people who, because of the out-of-pocket cost, probably lost out in the deal. But overall, for average employees, it was a good deal, both on a family level and on an individual plan level. I mean, obviously, the budget for the town, we all know how successful that's been to moderate the upward trend in health insurance costs. So OPEBs, this one, I do want to explain this. This is a new chart that we developed to show our progress towards getting to our ARC, which is the annual required contribution. So what this shows is the dark orange is what the actuary has calculated as if you were fully funding pension liability, OPEB liability right now. We would have to increase our budget by the difference between this bar and this bar, which is about $3.5 million, if I'm doing my math right. So we're putting in about 2.5. We need $6 million to get to the arc. If we follow our funding plan, we actually can meet our arc in about 10 years. And after sitting through a number of those special commission at the state level meetings and hearing other communities talk about what's going on and what isn't going on, I think we can be very proud that Brookline will be one of the very few number of communities that can say that. I know Wellesley can say that because they had basically an override to fund it. There were some other communities that have taken steps like this, but we can say with a straight face, based upon the actuaries' figures and our funding plan, that we can reach our arc in 10 years. Is it perfect? No. Would we like to get there sooner? Yes. But with all the other constraints in the budget, I think this is a very credible plan. And how we get there is by over here. And as Mel mentioned, what we're doing, and this is we're using free cash and ongoing operating revenue. When I said to the advisory committee, this budget's interesting in a way that you have the immediate budget concerns on the school side, again, being driven by the enrollment pressures and special education costs and those types of things. On the town side, we don't really have that. So what we're doing is, through the town-school partnership, addressing the school's needs, not to the extent that they would like, but it's addressing their needs. And on the town side, we're using our abilities, our monies, with a longer-term eye to try and pay down these liabilities that will pay off in the long run. So we're putting money in on an ongoing basis for pensions above and beyond what's required. We're putting more money into our OPEB funding plan than we had originally conceived. So we're putting an additional $450,000 in on an ongoing basis into the appropriation instead of the standard $250,000. We continue to fully assess our special revenue funds. We're using the runoff of the non-contributory retirees. We continue to basically earmark the Part D subsidy. And then there's the infusion of free cash. So if you back out the free cash, that's $3 million of ongoing revenue that's being earmarked for OPEBs, which I think, again, is a very good story for the town. Pensions, a little bit, I don't want to say not as good as the story, but as Mel said, because of some forces outside of the retirement board's control, meaning the market, the return hasn't matched the assumed rate of return. So what the retirement board did, and I believe they'll be appearing before you in a few weeks, is they adopted a funding schedule that was ultimately approved by the state that pushed the funding schedule forward 2 years or back, however you look at it, to 2030. The actuaries' numbers showed that if we didn't move back from 2028 and we wanted to reduce our assumed rate of return down to 7.75, the hit on the budget would have been massive. So what happened was we went to the fall town meeting. If you remember, we put additional money in the base, and now we're here saying that we pushed out the schedule, or the retirement board pushed out the schedule 2 years, but we were able to reduce the annual rate down to 7 3/4. And above and beyond the $933,000 that's required, we're recommending putting an additional $200,000 in the base for 14. That would be there for 15. So when the next valuation's done, we're hopefully in a position that we can either pull back to 2028 or even closer, and or pull back that 7.75 even more down to a 7.5 or something like that. So again, we're taking some aggressive steps above and beyond what's required in our appropriation as approved by the state to really try and improve this. And the reason why we're doing that is this. I don't think we presented this before looking like this. What we did here is we combined our unfunded liabilities, OPEBs and pensions. So what you see is a couple things. One, an eye-popping $360 million of unfunded liabilities. That's one. Two, you see that the OPEB liability has dropped, right, for things like going into the GIC, which was the biggest change there. Conversely, you see the unfunded liability for pensions going up. And that has to do with a few things, the biggest being the return on investment not meeting the assumed annual rate of return. So looking at it slightly differently at a funding ratio perspective, OPEBs, it's still extremely low, but we are at 10% funding of OPEBs, which is a lot better than zero. And pensions, you see we've dropped from just under 70% down to below 60%. So that's very concerning. It looks like we're going backwards on our funding schedule. So that's why we're taking these steps we believe that we have the capacity in the budget to do that. And again, what that really means is in a long term that we save money in both of these unfunded liabilities. Just very quickly to close, water and sewer budget, as it is every year, the biggest growth factor there is the MWRA assessment. Commissioner Papasturgeon will have a better idea of that sometime in the spring, but we're assuming a 3.6% growth. Golf, the only thing to mention here is, if you recall, the $500,000 maintenance facility appropriation is to be paid back by the enterprise fund, $25,000 a year over 20 years. And what that does is eliminates the town fee. If you also recall last year, there was some discussion about why is there even a town fee? Why are we taking money out of the golf operation? It should be plowed back into the operation. So the town fee goes away, and it's basically going to pay for the first $25,000 payment back for the loan. Recreation, you do see a significant increase of just about 10%. That's basically being driven by additional personnel costs. The vast majority of that is part-time, and that's really case-driven, wrong term, but the program-driven. They have a lot of new programs. They're actually increasing the number of preschool, early, I don't want to say early education, but kiddie care programs at the Sewell Rec Center. They see enrollment growth in a lot of their other programs, and as was very correctly pointed out to me tonight by the advisory committee, that should be expected. And you should expect to see that even more in the future because of the enrollment growth at the schools. There's going to be more demand on the rec department to offer these types of programs. So the revolving fund is going to continue to play a role in funding those programs. So when Lisa Paradis is before you, she'll be talking about the growth in those programs. And she'll also mention that there's a full-time custodian budgeted in this, which is fully funded in this budget, not the general fund, because it's pretty clear that having one custodian to manage 3 facilities, one of which is a swimming pool, isn't the right number. So we're going to pull back a bit on contractual services and have a full-time custodian fully paid for, which is one of the reasons why the benefit number is going up in that fund. CIP, we'll talk about this a lot more in a few weeks. What I want to talk about, though, is what's changed from the forecast and preliminary CIP presentation back on December 4th. The first one we've already talked about. Additional free cash allowed us to pull projects forward, $1.1 million. The second thing was, after having some further discussions on the budget with Chief Ford, we thought it made sense to take the $400,000 of one-time money in the CIP and rather pay for, which is for SCBA, the self-contained breathing apparatus equipment, and pay for that over a 3 or 4 year period in the operating budget. That way you don't have all of this very important equipment have their warranty run out at the same time. So by putting it in the operating budget over a 3 or 4 year period, it forces us to make sure we do it in the operating budget, not just in 14, but 15 and 16. By doing that, it also does free up some capacity, which is very helpful in the out years of the CIP. The other significant thing is Andy Papasturgeon has worked very closely with the firm working on the Municipal Service Center floor issue, and we had presented a CIP that assumed a $2 million bond authorization. Andy's convinced that that number is going to be closer to 2.5, so we're increasing that bond authorization to 2.5, and I've updated the debt management plan to reflect that. And then lastly, I call them the late additions, $40,000 that came from the Transportation Board very late in the process, but we were able to accommodate it for the annual discussion on pavement markings. So it's advisory committee psyched to have another discussion about pavement markings. So, and then the schools, as part of the ongoing budget discussions with them, basically buying them some operating budget relief by putting some items that are capital in nature, but they were going to plan on doing out of their operating budget and put that money in the CIP. So that basically buys them $175,000 of flexibility in their operating budget. So those are the only changes that have happened from back on December 4th. And this just shows 7.5% policy, which is augmented this year all the way up to 8.4% by using that additional free cash. I'll skip that. Just on to the last point, the long-range financial plan. What this shows, and as Mel correctly pointed out, these are cumulative. We got to balance our budget, so these go away. But if you just subtract these numbers, you'll see what the annual problem is. You know, $3 million plus in 15, $2 million, 1 in 16, etc. And that's being driven by this. Revenue growth of about 3% assumed, expenditure growth of about 4%. That 1% delta in each year, when you cum it up, you get a budget gap of about 4%, which is why that number is so large. But interestingly, the advisory committee asked a question about the long-range financial plan, and in a long-winded way, I basically said it's a large number of assumptions. The revenue side is, I don't want to say easy, but it's a lot easier in Massachusetts because we have Prop 2.5. We don't have local income taxes or sales taxes where you have to run regression analysis to figure out what the forecasted growth in revenue is. So we know what our revenue is. It's about 3 to 3.5% annually. And when you assume a 5% growth in health insurance and 2+% for collective bargaining each year, and the school budget's grown by over 4 or 5% each year because of enrollment in special education, you get the gap. So there's a lot of numbers that's basically telling you that if things don't change, you have this annual operating budget gap that needs to be addressed. So the last thing I will say before questions for any of us is that, as I said earlier, this to me is a very interesting budget because you've got the school crunch that's here and it's now, and then on our side, we're really trying to take some steps to use some monies to address our longer-term liabilities far more aggressively than we are actually required to. So,
Award-winning budget
yo.
plan, financial plan. Okay, questions, Selectman Daley?
Well, it's really more a comment. Thank you for the presentation, and I want to say I, for one, am very happy to see we're sticking with our fiscal guidelines and addressing those long-term liabilities. I think when I started, was chaired an OPEB committee a few years ago, and when we started, if I remember correctly, Steve Cirillo, the finance director, said at that time that if we did not start addressing the OPEB liability, it would grow so large that by, I think it was around 2040, it would take up most of the operating budget. So people may wonder why we're doing this at a time when we're sort of having a bit of a growth crisis with our schools, but it is absolutely critical because that is going to take more and more of the operating budget if not addressed. And I also want to say I'm happy to see the reserves that Moody's asked for. I think that it's so important that we maintain our AAA bond rating because I always say to people that is like when you're going out to get a mortgage. If you have a really good credit rating, you're going to be able to borrow at the most favorable rates, and that's what our AAA bond rating does for us. And particularly as we've had so many big projects lately, that being able to borrow at this time when rates are low, but being able to get the absolute best rate when we go out to borrow has been very, very important because, again, debt service takes up a significant part of our budget, and if we were borrowing at even a slightly higher rate, we would then have to devote much more of our operating budget to paying that debt service. So I am pleased with what you've done. I am also a fan of the town-school partnership, but I fully understand the need to deviate from that a little bit at this time to help out the schools when they are facing this this sort of kind of unprecedented growth.
Selectman Goldstein?
Thank you. Thank you for the very coherent presentation too, Mel, Melissa, and Sean. Something that I keyed on as you went through the materials, Sean, was the new growth on real estate tax slide, which I don't think I'd considered it quite the way you presented it here tonight. There was all that great news about how new growth not too long ago was 100% of our 2.5% increase, and the number this year is actually not so great at all. We're at I think it was about 30%, right?
38.
38%, and that gives us somewhat of a dilemma, given the school population crisis that's occupied so much of our discussion, because we don't necessarily want to encourage new growth in the residential realm and further exacerbate that problem. Not that we turn our backs to it when it does arrive, but it's not necessarily an area where we're encouraging growth, which leads us to, non-residential areas of new growth. Now, Kara's not here to talk about this, but I wonder if you have any thoughts for us on how, well, first of all, I'd like to know where you do see the new growth that you've accounted for, and secondly, what thoughts you can have for bringing that new growth number up high, that percentage back up higher, short of exacerbating our school population problem.
I probably don't have an answer for the second part, but for the first part, we did work with Kara when we presented the forecast back in December, and we have the impact of 2 Brookline Place kicking in, I think it's in 17, in 18, and then fully in there in 19, or I might be off the year, but it's definitely not helping in 14 or 15 or 16. So that's the one major project that we've got factored in there. And if you look at the long-range financial plan in those years, you see that the deficits aren't as bad. That's because of that additional new growth, which is another way of saying how important new growth is. We did talk about a similar, we had a similar conversation with the advisory committee about, well, geez, is this really good? How much of the 30 million is actually, are you netted out to the good with all the, new kids that are coming? And, I think everybody agreed that you can't say that all of this new growth has come from new housing units, because the numbers just don't show that the number of housing units that have been created were that great over the period of time. And, we talked about the split between commercial and residential, and ballpark, it's like 75-25. And of that commercial, it's really the personal property, which is utilities, that's been driving it. So there's been very little commercial new growth over the last few years. And the residential is broken down. As you know, in the recap that Gary presents, there's the breakdown of new growth, not just by commercial and residential, but what type of residential. Is it a new permit, as they call it, or is it an addition on the house, or what have you, a condo conversion? And there might be some interest on behalf of the advisory committee to kind of go back and look at some of that stuff. But, as I said, when I pull the slide up, it's one of those difficult things from a pure budget perspective. New growth is critical. But, you got to have the right kind of new growth. You don't want to have additional kids to make the problems worse, and you want to have the right kind of growth for the neighborhood. Again, from a purely budget perspective, you build some nice commercial developments around town, and you got oodles of new growth, but that just isn't, that's not the way it's going to happen in Brookline.
I would just add that, clearly the economy has had a huge impact. To Brookline Place alone, I think, has been deferred because of the economic conditions. We have limited opportunities, but I do think that if this board in particular shows the leadership it has and targets these sites, Durgan-Waldo, I think, is a good example of how the Board of Selectmen is using their authority to coordinate and facilitate other groups. Cleveland Circle is another example, and I think we want to really focus back on to Brookline Place, because those are projects that are on the boards, and I think we can, with some now that the economy is getting a little better, I do think we can strategically work towards making those happen. And I think those are all the kind of good growth projects that are good for the community and will have a net positive impact. Thank you.
Just to follow up, I do believe there also is something that might be even more near-term and at least seeing some activity, is the Red Cab site on Route 9. But it's true, all of those opportunities are out on the horizon. Typically, even if one of them were to be clearly where there's a developer who wants to go ahead, there's still an 18-month to 2-year process before we'd see any kind of results.
Yeah. I can remember boards of selectmen 10 to 12 years ago being very proactive on this subject and making presentations to town meeting about how important this is and from a budgeting point of view and taking other proactive steps to work on it. And I'd like to find, I don't know that this current iteration has been as proactive on it. I'd like to see if there's ways that we can help.
Well, we're definitely,
Waldo Street, of course, being an exception
yeah,
to that.
Durgan Waldo, it seems to me, actually has potential, but again, market-driven in the sense that we can, I think, do our part to facilitate, but the developer is going to move when the market's right. Yeah, and so we've been definitely held back by the recession, basically, for several years.
I think Selectman Goldstein, though, raises a good point. I have seen attitudes around town become very anti-development. And I understand why that is. People feel like, their neighborhoods have gotten more dense over time. I've seen infill stuff go into my neighborhood, and, you prefer it when there's woods or across the street than a house and things like that. But I do think we need to remind people, as you say, that if we don't have that new growth, we have to seek other ways to meet the budget gap, and that may be in the form of asking people to pass an override. So the new growth, does serve an important release valve to the budget, I think. And as far as the residential stuff goes, historically, we have learned that when you have those very expensive luxury condos, they tend to, ironically, not have kids for the schools as much as more affordable units. So that's one area of residential that we have had also historically a goal of supporting affordable housing, but that does produce more kids for the schools.
Well, I will actually comment that the market studies that I'm aware of that we've heard from in working on the Durgan Waldo property have not suggested that the luxury condo market is in fact got any market demand right now in Brookline. So these things change over time. Maybe that would have been true 5 years ago. The issue now, I think, is what will be seen as having the market ready for it over the next 2 or 3 years. And I don't think we have the answer to that one right now. I do think, though, that be careful what you wish for, because if it brings more kids into the school system, we will pay more than we will get. Anyway, having said that, thank you all for the work that you have put into this and for its timely presentation. I would say getting it done through the blizzard was, I don't know whether you all were able to be here during the snow, but you certainly obviously worked hard at the last minute to get the final product ready for us, and we do appreciate that. And I would say this is a good budget. It's fiscally responsible. It's held to our policies and our standards, and I wish perhaps at another time we might go a little more into detail, not tonight, on your thoughts on the performance evaluations. And I do want to hear about what, now I've forgotten the acronym.
SMART?
Yeah, what SMART means. Right. Which would be
as
good.
the department heads come forward, I think we will tell them that's where we want some focus on that.
Would be nice.
So that'd be great.
In each department, do
Yeah,
presentation.
exactly.
Yeah, that would be great.
Good.
Okay, thank you all, and I believe we have a couple of items to finish before we conclude the meeting. There are appointments to 2 commissions. You want this? Got it right here.
Okay, so there are 2 commissions that are on the calendar. The first is the Commission for the Disabled. There's an expiring vacancy of Eileen Berger, who is interested in reappointment. So I would...
And a new applicant.
And a new applicant who could fill a vacancy. So I'm going to announce the nomination of Eileen Berger as reappointment for a 3-year term expiring in 2015.
Aye.
Aye.
And then to fill a vacancy, we'll fill the vacancy at 2015 with Sophia Johansson.
Aye.
And moving on to the Information Technology Advisory Committee, to fill a vacancy expiring in 2014, John Gallagher.
Aye. Okay, that concludes the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Tuesday, February 12th. There will be no meeting next Tuesday.